to introduce our next two panelists. April Den is U.S. Director of Brand, CPG and Retail at Samsung Ads, and Geoff Spence is the Regional Vice President of Platforms at SpotX. We're going to be talking today about the rise of free ad-supported streaming TV and what it means to marketers. As they're getting themselves on, it's, for somebody like myself who's been doing this for a couple of decades, and remember when, it was pretty much just broadcast TV, and we were worried about, as broadcast TV salespeople, like cable penetration, like to even think that cable penetration was a thing. And marketers were buying and selling impressions on broadcast using Nielsen the way that they still are today. But when they looked at cable, there wasn't a big enough audience to actually get ratings against most of these cable programs. So they were buying along contextual alignment. So if they wanted somebody who's in sports, they would go to ESPN, or somebody wanted food, they go to the Food Network. And it seems like it's cyclical. It's happening again between the death of the cookie and third-party targeting and things of that nature going away. FANG and some of the big players are still being bought and sold on those platforms, on the Nielsen type platforms. But marketers are leaning into contextual alignment on CTV, and as long as the audience is big enough, it seems like a good place for them to fish. So I think that I've stretched this out a bit, and I believe that we have April on right now. Are you there?
I am. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, John.
Hi. And Geoff, I think you're on as well.
I am. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great. Nice to see the both of you. Geoff, that is a sweet backdrop you have there. I like the painting. It's very
Thanks.
cool.
I'm hanging out in the Guggenheim.
Oh, good. You're from the accent to the paintings. You just reek of class right now. I hope I'm bringing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
April, our backdrops are actually matching. This is what I was talking about the other day. And we're getting later in the day today. The kids are being dropped off the bus, at least in New York. So this is like reality is starting to set in, unless you're in the Google.
Right.
I want to start off with definitions. As the rise of free ad-supported TV. Like, what does that mean? It's taking hold. With any form of new media, definitions are really important. So, like, how do you explain and this question to the both of you, what FAST is and how it's different from other kinds of streaming media that's out there? For example, like SVOD, Netflix, or Hulu, who we just heard from. So I'll let you both take that question.
Sure, I can jump in on this one. So FAST is basically what it sounds like, free ad-supported streaming television. It's basically ad-supported streaming video services that feature video on-demand content in a number of linear-like channels based on that video content. It's usually 100% free. It's available as apps on an array of streaming devices and smart TVs. But it can also be accessed via smartphones, tablets, browsers, you name it. And today, most kind of do not typically have original content. Instead, they're relying on sort of an array of library content that, depending on the service, is usually a mix of online video, older network TV series, or studio or independent movies. We oftentimes refer to it as cable for cord cutters.
I don't think there's really much else I would add to that. I think it's just that, if you think about inherently, when we've traditionally consumed TV, it's always sat behind some type of paywall. If you're paying cable subscription, if you're paying a monthly fee, with these free ad-supported streaming services, really, there should be no paywall, right? There are elements that there's a dual model where there's a paywall to access some content, but primarily anyone can download the app on their Samsung TV or any type of connected device, and they can start streaming, out of the gates. There's really no barrier to be able to access that content.
Great. Thank you guys for setting the stage. And I think it's important for us to set the stage because streaming really does mean so many different things to so many different people. And you could be thinking of it as a platform. You could be thinking of it as a Netflix versus a Roku, or how does Pluto fall into this, or what is Peacock doing these days? So I appreciate that definition and basically, like I said, setting the stage for this. Fast, the free ad-supported streaming TV space has been picking up a ton of momentum. I'd like to hear your opinion on that, for what's driving that. Like, why is this taking such a hold with so much content that's out there?
I could take that one. I think there's obviously a variety of different factors. Probably, you've heard the old saying, content is king, right? I think that what you've seen with the fast ecosystem is that there's a lot more content that's moved into that. And I think it's actually presented the viewer with a real alternative to what was traditional pay TV. If you're used to accessing premium content and you're willing to pay for that, right? Today you do that with all your SVOD services, but there is such a large amount of premium content that has moved into the fast ecosystem as well, that it really does offer a viable alternative. I mean, you've seen the likes of Viacom with their acquisition of Pluto starting to move more and more premium like content into that. Sure, might be more catalog type of content, but I think that you definitely are seeing more content. I think the other factor is, which is part of the factor and also part of the outcomes, is the acceleration of things like cord cutting and cord nevers. There's such a large chunk of the viewership now that is never going to access pay TV, and that's just a large percentage of where they spend their time and consuming their content is across these fast services. And probably the last one that I would touch on is just the experience itself for the user and the viewer. I think you've seen over time the way that all the fast services have built out their UIs, much better user experience with recommendations of content, accessing catalogs of libraries of content, and just in terms of the experience that you have as a user, it's becoming a lot more premium in nature as well. And I think those kind of factors are all driving to more and more mass adoption of the fast services.
Yeah, I would say I pretty much would just reiterate what Geoff said. I mean, I think the momentum of streaming is driven by sort of this increased fragmentation of just endless choices of high quality programming. But then it's also combined with kind of this on-demand world of digital that just is enabling consumers to be able to not just choose what they want from all those endless options, but they also get to choose how and when they want to watch it. It's sort of like, I guess, the Amazon effect of just having sort of that immediate gratification that comes with platforms like streaming. And I think in particular for mediums like FAST, consumers are only willing to pay for so many subscriptions. And that subscription fatigue has really positioned AVOD as like the new currency for engaging consumers where they're spending a majority of their time. We're even seeing now that ad-supported streaming formats are now about 44% of streaming time spent, which is approaching basically parity with SVOD. And, no surprise across every platform, linear, SVOD, AVOD, when COVID was just starting, you saw a surge in activity across all formats for different reasons, right? It was news, world news that was driving a large portion of the increase in linear time spent. But then, us going into sort of working from home then increased all of the streaming services. What's really interesting is as that spike hit and then people started to settle into sort of the new COVID reality, you actually see, no surprise, a little bit of that spike start to turn downward as things start to stabilize. Yeah. But AVOD was the one area that was driving a significant portion of continued growth, both, going into COVID and after COVID, because users started to become much more comfortable with these formats. And now you'll start to see sort of this residual impact, in particular in this area.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talked about like fatigue when it comes to like what people will pay for, right? Think about like when cord cutting started, like what is that number? Like, am I okay with 3? Am I okay with 4? Is it equaling back to what I was paying in cable? Like in your, and this is a question we didn't really talk about before, but you brought up that point. It'd just be interesting for me to hear that. Like, what is that threshold that you think right now, or personally?
So, I mean, I guess I have my own personal opinion on what I'm willing to pay for, and COVID has only made me more willing to pay for more, candidly, more than ever, because I'm just spending so much more time with myself, trying to, find new things to do and engage with. But I think a lot of the data out there supports that consumers typically start to fall off between 3 to 5 subscriptions. And so, by and large, the numbers show that all of the growth that's going to be driven for marketers trying to engage with consumers are going to come from AVOD, because a lot of consumers already had kind of their foundation in terms of SVOD already kind of solidified. And so as they spend more time looking for more content, they're going to be turning to the free formats because there's just so many options there. Why pay for more? So I'll say there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to cite the study offhand, but I did see recently somewhere that around a $30 purse is what the typical household in the US is willing to part for SVOD services.
I'm way over that. I'm such a consumer of content. I love how disparate it still is. Between Disney and Peacock. Well, Peacock is there was free options for it, but if there's a specific program, it's going to drive me to subscribe, and then I'll eventually get hooked on other programs outside of that one that I signed up for. So that's interesting. And my wife is complaining to me that our bills keep on going up, and we have all these movies that we're not watching, and I don't care. We're gonna keep buying. April, this one is for you. For Samsung, manufacturers and device makers seem to really embrace free streaming. Samsung was a first mover in the space, launching TV Plus, actually one that I have. Others have followed. What have you seen in terms of usage on your devices?
Yeah, so certainly going into this year, we just launched TV Plus like a year or so ago in sort of a much more kind of consumer-facing way. And it quickly became the #2 most used AVOD service on our TV sets, ahead of some of the big players that you can imagine are accessible on your smart TV. So it's quickly become one of our #1 strategic priorities, is just to continue to own more and more of that streaming time spent from consumers. So for us, it's a very important part of kind of our future-proofing strategy. What we've seen is that 90% of, well, I'll say half of the people that are using TV Plus are full-out cord cutters, meaning they're not accessing any linear content whatsoever. So it truly is for us our iteration of cable for cord cutters. But 90% of consumers that are using TV Plus also aren't using any other OTT device to stream. And that's a really interesting phenomenon, because we used to make our dumb TVs smart by plugging in a device, and that became the primary way we'd access streaming content. And in today's day and age, and it is why a lot of the device players are trying to get into sort of the OEM game and that they now have. Are you still hearing me, John?
Yeah, you said at the OEM game, and I lost a couple of keywords in between.
Sorry.
Now
we must be the lovely WebEx connection. I would just say that, like, for into the operating systems, because consumers are spending more time streaming directly from their TV, and they're becoming much less reliant on devices because the experience has improved so dramatically. Today, we see, I think, almost 7.5% growth just since the start of this year alone. We have about 145 channels. And if you were to just purely look at time spent on TV Plus and compare it to all of the major TV networks, we would be a top 10 most watched network on TV Plus alone. So again, the adoption was already strong going into kind of the pre-COVID world, but now COVID certainly.
April, we're losing you a bit. You've jumped in and out a little bit, at least on my screen. But there was one point that I missed that I wanted to hear. When you think about the size of Samsung when you compare it to other smart TVs, like what type of, like, again, think back to cable penetration, like what type of penetration does Samsung have in the market? As if you were to look at it like a pie, like what slice of that pie would be Samsung?
Try to prevent the delay. I would just say, can you guys hear me?
Right now,
Yes.
yep.
For us, we've been the #1 smart TV manufacturer for the last 13 years straight. So we have about 40% market share of the smart TV.
Okay.
And leveraging our platform, the data that we're collecting from smart TVs represents 60% of all available TV data in market. So tremendous amount of scale that we really stay focused on kind of continuing that growth trajectory.
Great. We got that number. Thank you very much for that. It did cut in and out a bit, but I think it's gotten better with the camera off. You gotta love technology, and we're just doing it live anyway. So this is the joys of a live broadcast. But like to have that 60% or that 60% piece of the pie is fantastic, and congratulations to Samsung for being a first to market and continuing to see that growth. And obviously you're a huge partner of ours at Jukin Media. I like the experience with Samsung as you maybe watch something on the TV Plus channel and you're scrolling for your other apps, that will continue to play as you're watching or looking for something else to watch. And I think that's really cool. And obviously SpotX is getting metrics on that, and we're able to sell into that and do all those wonderful things. Geoff, there's been, and this is for you specifically, April. So I'm sorry, you specifically, Geoff. There's been a lot of M&A in the space, right? Pluto and Viacom combining, Comcast purchasing Xumo, Fox, and Tubi. How has M&A impacted the advertising market from SpotX's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very relevant point. I mean, it feels like the last 2 years has just been a matter of time until one of the major fast services was going to be acquired. And I think the signal that it sent to the market is, the fact that major media companies are now looking to include these fast services as part of essentially their mix of inventory that can make available to big advertisers. Really just signals to the market just how big the fast ecosystem has become and what an important player it is moving forward. I think part of that has allowed now these major media companies to expand their offering. Obviously a lot of them had very big traditional linear businesses, and as kind of the pay TV households have decreased over time, what they need to do is be able to present to buyers, hey, we can reach a mass audience. We can reach, all the data points that you want to be able to target, and all the viewers and the consumers that you want to reach. And there was a big chunk missing of that. That is obviously what that fast ecosystem has come in to be able to take up. So now I think when they present at upfronts, you saw Viacom do this, you saw Fox do this with Tubi. These fast services are very much part of the offering that they're presenting to market, to say, hey, look, we have all these core elements of our business. I'm sure you've got all the major media companies bringing their direct to consumer apps and leading with those, but I think a big part of that as well is the fast ecosystem. And what it's really signaled to the market, I think, is legitimizing, the fact that this is where, as a media buyer, you should be spending your dollars. If you can secure an upfront with a Viacom or a Fox that includes access to Pluto or Tubi, that really signals, hey, that's really where I should be spending my money. And so I think it's really allowed from the advertiser's perspective, access to a hard to reach audience that was declining. And from the supply side, on the media perspective, they've been able to expand their offering to include a mix of media that now allows advertisers to reach that really hard to reach audience.
Yep. And to think back to when streaming first started, it was being given away as added value to a TV buy. And then Hulu was created, and then CBS held on to their streaming, and like this whole thing just kept spinning and spinning. So thank you for that. It is really interesting to see how everything has progressed to today.
I mean, even just seeing the news recently from a Disney around how the restructures, and same thing with Viacom, right? They're almost thinking about streaming as being now the forefront of their business, and even just how they're structuring themselves moving forward is kind of putting streaming at the epicenter. Yeah,
leadership is changing hands at these big companies. They're leaning, and to one point of it, it's future facing. It's future forward, right? We're putting this step, and we're hoping that post COVID, when things go back to normal, we could continue this trend. And people are creatures of habit, so I'm guessing that these habits that we're forming right now should stick as we hopefully go back to somewhat of a normal world.
Yeah.
April, if we have you back, say hi.
I'm here. Hello.
Good. What categories of business? This is a question. I guess across the both of you, for advertising, what needs this fast fulfill for advertisers, and what does the industry need to do to mature? And April, can
you say that last part of the question again,
sure.
John?
I'll repeat the whole thing. Advertising, right? So what needs this fast fulfill, right, for advertisers, and what does the industry need to do to mature?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. That's a really great question, but it's a very loaded question at that. I think fast is a very obvious way to reach cord cutters, especially if you want to be where consumers are spending more and more of their time, and if you have specific types of audiences like millennials, who we're seeing are above average in terms of time spent in streaming services, and if you want to win with very important consumers like millennials that represent a huge portion of growth for a lot of verticals this year, then you almost have to be in kind of the CTV OTT space, and in particular, AVOD services. I think the challenge is that you'll have some advertisers that are very TV-driven advertisers that are some of the largest TV advertisers, where running in CTV and OTT is a natural extension of what they're doing in TV, and sometimes it's a literal extension of what they're doing in TV to help kind of continue to reach consumers. And a huge portion of what we do today is focused on any and all brands that are trying to drive incremental reach to their linear buys, right? Because we have data on who actually saw the ads on linear television, and therefore we can target the people we know they did not reach. But then there's this kind of growing adoption of brands that are leveraging CTV and OTT as more of a lower funnel strategy. And a lot of those brands either are brands that are in TV but need to kind of push consumers down the funnel, or they're advertisers that haven't been in TV at all. And they're now considering OTT and CTV because traditionally TV doesn't have the ability to kind of truly tie back to real world business metrics like sales lift, foot traffic, or some other high value action. And so CTV OTT represents an opportunity to kind of engage consumers and then be able to follow them all the way through to conversion.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much along the same lines of thinking. Sorry, carry on, April.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Great. Go ahead, Geoff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, in terms of the need that it fulfills, I think, April hit it spot on. It reaches a specific audience. I think the other thing to mention would be the fasts are inherently digital in nature, in the sense that it's happening in a digital environment, primarily on a CTV environment as well. And so what you get here is a combination of being able to reach viewers on the large screen, but also have the ability to layer in some type of data targeting, which is definitely more important when you start to think about addressable and the ability to actually reach a user or a viewer with a specific message. I think that something interesting to think about how the FAST system or FAST ecosystem will mature over time. I think the key things that we talk about within OTT, just in general, right, is the idea of frequency capping and ensuring a much better user experience. Obviously, measurement as well. How do you take the traditional linear business of GRPs that are where the majority of money is being spent today, combine that with the more impression-based buying that you see within the digital kind of OTT ecosystems. Obviously, there's a number of measurements, options out there. You've seen Nielsen bringing out their DAR product for a while. That's definitely taken a lot of adoption with some of the major device manufacturers. I wouldn't say that it's broken through as the key currency, right, in terms of what people are going to be looking to buy at. The idea of outcomes-based buys, right? NBC was a big advocate of that. What are your outcomes, brand? What are you looking to achieve? How do we measure that? That's going to be a really interesting thing to see coming forward. But one just comment, I think, in general around the fasts and the maturity of them. One of the interesting trends that I think we'll start to see over time is, if you look at the fast ecosystem, Zumo, Pluto, Samsung TV Plus, Vizio's Watch Free, there's a lot of sort of similar type of content that you can access across each of those services. And I think as these fast ecosystems start to mature over time, the idea of how can they create, from a content perspective, something unique with their offering, that they can draw viewers in and sort of entice them towards leveraging their platform, will be really interesting. And that sort of is an indication, I think, of where the fast ecosystem is moving towards, to become more mature, where the way that they will start to differentiate themselves is through exclusive partnerships with content and the like.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Geoff. Actually, we are going down that path ourselves, right? Like we're starting to get into creating our own content channels. Like we have a wildlife channel that's, specific to Samsung TV Plus. And we're identifying kind of, every day we're looking at kind of new opportunities or partnerships that allow us to do just that, specifically to that point, right? There's this fragmentation, but then there's also this duplication of content, especially in the streaming space, because a lot of it isn't original content. And so it's how do you kind of balance that mix so that you have a lot of options for consumers, but also a lot of differentiation. And I think the other piece of that differentiation is also the data that those platforms have on their consumers that help to kind of break through the duplication and the fragmentation and really hone in on, like I want to reach shoppers of mac and cheese. And I need to be able to identify, is that person in a household that's a shopper of mac and cheese? Can I see if they've seen my ad already? And am I in differentiated content? And so I think that is an opportunity, but also a big challenge for a lot of both device players as well as, content providers is how do you effectively kind of combine, achieve sort of the outcomes in both a tangible way, but also an efficient way for a lot of these brands that, have high expectations, but want it to still be super efficient media.
Yeah, you touched on something that was actually part of my next question around which advertisers are leaning in the most to OTT and CTV, and which metrics are they leveraging, and also, is it okay not to be so data heavy? Is it okay not to show conversion and to want to get the right eyeballs? And as long as that audience is big enough, let's actually align, instead of having so much data we've gotten so used to having at our fingertips, sometimes drive up the frequency and make it a less enjoyable experience for the user. I'm sorry, for the consumer. So are there types of categories of business that they're leaning in more?
I would say from my perspective, and obviously I'm a little bit biased because I oversee CPG and retail. So for me,
You're doing great.
I'll speak from the lens of CPG and retail. So what's really interesting is CPG, although they are the largest spenders in TV and have been that way since the 1950s, they are also some of the most data-driven advertisers. Right? Like TV is a workhorse for them because they have rates grandfathered in from the 1950s. And so it's like pennies on the dollar, and TV will always serve a very important purpose for those brands. But they know that their consumers are shifting. So you'll see that a lot of CTV, or at least in the minds of retailers or CPG brands that are looking to justify the higher costs of premium streaming media, is through sort of a data-driven approach where they are able to validate and quantify what it is that is happening when they're reaching consumers. One, to drive incremental reach to linear, certainly, but two, we're seeing many more CPG brands that are really leaning into OTT to tie it back to real-world business outcomes. But also they're reaching out to us to figure out how we can help them better understand those consumers in a way that they couldn't before. And with that, we're actually seeing a lot of these brands come to the table wanting to partner to build things together that doesn't exist in the industry today. And so what's really interesting is it's not like this standard sort of cyclical ecosystem where we push out media through our content and then advertisers buy that. You're actually seeing it kind of go two ways now, where brands are coming to the table to say, hey, this doesn't exist, and we know it's a possibility. Let's try building it together. And so I think the next 12 to 18 months will be really telling for the industry, and a lot of development that we're seeing in the marketplace will be driven by not just media publishers and platforms, but also by the actual brands themselves.
Yeah, and tying that into content and what users could bring to the table with content and keeping it authentic, it plays very well into that point. And we've been seeing a lot of success with that across the market, and specifically where I'm at Jukin. Like, we're seeing a lot more folks lean in to things that are not polished. And Quibi's been a topic of conversation for the last couple panels. I do think that snackable type content, or things that are not made for a full-length feature or an episodic full-length show, people are used to having things that are real and authentic, and that's what they're leaning into a bit more than things that are polished. And when you do things like that, those opportunities, you could build these custom programs with advertisers in a more efficient way, and they're more effective because it's hitting a heartstring, or comedy, or drama, or something like that that's real. Geoff, I have a question for you, and I know we have to wrap soon. And if we could get through it, I'll grab one question from the audience. But addressable TV has been a buzzword for some time now. What does that mean to you at SpotX, and how close are we to having fully addressable television?
Sure. I think that by definition, the way that we at SpotX think about addressable TV is the ability to place an individualized, targeted ad to a household or a viewer, right? The idea to present them with an ad that is relevant for them specifically as a household or a viewer. I think in terms of the broader industry, inherently OTT, as we refer to it often, is addressable by nature, because it allows the ability to layer on data. And that's especially on the programmatic side. We've seen that grow pretty significantly. I think as it relates to addressable TV, I think knowing that OTT is inherently addressable, we tend to refer to that as more of the legacy side of traditional linear. That sort of encompasses making linear, over the air and set-top box inventory more addressable in nature. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of advancements on the technology side that are facilitating that. You obviously, you sort of see this trend of more of those ecosystems opening up. I mean, today SpotX is actually serving addressable ads on some of the major MVPD set-top boxes. And so that ecosystem is moving more and more into an addressable kind of environment. What's really interesting about programmatic, especially the ecosystem that we sit in, is that as the scale of addressable TV increases, inherently you need to have the ability to layer on some type of data targeting to achieve what you're trying to achieve with addressable, and that is serving an individualized ad to each household or viewer. And to be able to do that at scale, you really need to be able to do that within a programmatic environment. And so, that's part of, the recent announcement that we had with our partnership with Project Or is another addressable product that's out there. Same with Nielsen, they have their addressable product. And I think that side of the ecosystem is really interesting, where you're starting to see the programmers themselves are actually now, which has traditionally been an option available to, say, the MVPDs or all the sales houses that leveraging those systems like an Effective or a VIA Media. Now those capabilities are actually going to be available to the programmers themselves to actually kind of step on that linear feed and insert it at the glass level. Obviously, Or is primarily Vizio today, but I think it's opening up more and more of that more traditional linear ecosystem to inherently what we see today in OTT, which is the ability to address a specific household or viewer.
Yeah, and I think that consolidation is making this a little bit easier to actually wrangle the proverbial kittens of all the different places that the ads are running on different platforms, be it Samsung, be it Vizio, and hopefully we will work towards having a single metric system the way that we have in linear, and it seems like we are going towards that. I'd like to thank the both of you. We're actually at time. April and Geoff, thank you guys so much for taking the time and for prepping with me yesterday. There you are, April. Congratulations on fighting through technology. Samsung will be proud of you. So thank you both very much. We're going to continue now. We have just one more session left of the day. Shortly, we're going to be welcoming Michelle Beauchamp to the stage. Michelle is the Vice President of Marketing at Vero Water. We're also joined by Christine White, who's the Director of Social and Content Marketing at Ultra Beauty. These sessions will be